Putin has restricted Russian politicians from leaving the country out of fear of a mass exodus. Vladimir Putin has restricted the travel of high-ranking politicians and officials out of concern that they might defect from the Kremlin. The president is reportedly worried that anti-war ministers and civil servants will flee to the West now that Russia's invasion of Ukraine has failed to produce results. In order to leave the country, senior politicians and officials now need permission from Putin's prime minister, Mikhail Mishustin, according to new rules instituted by the Kremlin. The British Ministry of Defence claims the new regulations were likely designed to prevent the flight or defection of increasingly disaffected officials. A former employee of Russia's central bank, Alexandra Prokopenko, has also made similar claims. He revealed the following to Carnegie Politica. Some civil servants and employees of state corporations were ordered to hand in their passports, and officials and employees of state companies at both the federal and regional levels were barred from leaving Russia. Those in the military, in the security services, or in a position of trust within the civilian government were the only people subject to these limits prior to the war. Dmitry Peskov, Putin's spokesman, admitted that the social military operation in Ukraine has resulted in stricter rules. To avoid the stigma of war, the Kremlin has been calling the invasion of its enough during country a social military operation. Legislators in Moscow have proposed harsher punishments for those convicted of terrorism, high treason, and sabotage as Russians grow increasingly impatient with the slow progress being made in taking over Ukraine. The current maximum sentence for committing a terrorist act, defined as a crime endangering lives and intended to destabilize Russia, is 15 years. This would be increased to 20 years. The maximum sentence for sabotage has been increased to 20 years in prison, up from 15, and the maximum sentence for international terrorism has been increased from 12 to life in prison. Vasily Piskaryov, head of the Security and Anti-Corruption Committee in the State Duma or lower chamber of parliament, outlined the proposed changes. Putin and other top officials frequently accuse Ukraine and the West of seeking to weaken and break up Russia. Since the war began in February 2022, authorities have been harsh in their treatment of dissenters. The heir to a prominent New York family, the Vanderbilts, who made their fortune in railroads and shipping in the 19th century, claims he was duped by a private equity firm in the United States that was actually fronting for a group of wealthy Russian oligarchs with ties to Vladimir Putin. According to a recently filed fraud lawsuit, Carter Burden III believed a group of financiers were providing a much-needed financial boost to his successful cloud services provider, LogicWorks, when in fact they were responsible for its eventual collapse, forcing a fire sale for a fraction of its worth. Burden claims that intermediaries lied to him repeatedly about the nature of Pamplona Capital Management, the firm that acquired a controlling stake in LogicWorks in 2016. According to Burden, Pamplona Capital Management was less than a proper investment fund and more of a shell company, set up to invest the personal fortunes of Mikhail Fridman, Petr Avayan, German Khan, and Alexei Kuzmichev. At least one of the four oligarchs has been credibly accused of international money laundering, and all four are rumored to have ties to the Kremlin. Burden's lawsuit does not include any of these people as defendants. The 22-page lawsuit was filed in Manhattan Supreme Court on Friday and made public the following morning. It alleges that, for years, Pamplona's representatives lied to and obscured the truth from Mr. Burden to prevent him from learning the truth. Conflicts with authorities were glossed over. Banks and other outside investors' worries were disregarded. Mr. Burden's inquiries were either ignored or met with outright lies. According to the lawsuit, Burden's LogicWorks was doing well even after he learned the identities of his new business partners but before Russia invaded Ukraine in early 2014. The four oligarchs with whom Burden, then 55, had unwittingly gone into business were soon blacklisted from the international banking system and branded international pariahs. According to his lawsuit, Burden was shocked when his business became toxic to lenders, investors, and government watchdogs overnight. After being blacklisted by the United States, Alpha Bank founder Friedman and Alpha Bank president Avayan were sanctioned by the European Union on February 28, 2022. Avayan had previously served as Russia's Minister of Foreign Economic Relations during the early 1990s, when both Friedman and Avayan were accused of having ties to organized crime, money laundering, and drug trafficking. Khan, who allegedly liked to bring a pistol to business meetings, and Kuzmichev, who had 2 yachts seized by French authorities last year, were added to the list a little over 2 weeks later. After the United States sanctioned Friedman, Avayan, Khan, and Kuzmichev, the United Kingdom quickly followed suit. Burden claims he was ultimately forced to sell his company. However, by that point, few customers were willing to risk buying it. Burden claims in his lawsuit that he was forced to sell LogicWorks at artificially deflated prices because of the company's legal and geopolitical risks posed by its Russian backers. According to Burden, tens of millions of dollars were lost on what was supposed to be a lifeline.